Hello and welcome to Reinventing Nerds. Today we have a really interesting story that we're going to hear from Duncan Davidson because he's joining us all the way from Berlin, Germany. And he has a nice, background that he's going to share with us and some what he calls the Empathy Wobble. That's a little preview here of our show. So let me just tell you a little bit about Duncan. He is the CTO in residence at Microsoft over in Berlin. And he's been in the computer industry for 40 years now. And he's worked for Sun Microsystems, done startup work, and he's also veered off for a little while and done some photography for TED Talks that you may have seen some of his photography and you didn't even know it. So look for his name when you see those credits going by on those TED Talks you're watching. So let's get started. Duncan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. And this has just been really exciting to have my first international guest. So you're special in a number of ways here. But I'd first like to ask you to just tell our listeners, what does it mean to be a CTO in residence at Microsoft? What do you do?
No, that's yeah, it's an interesting title. I mean, when I first got it, I was like, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
And isn't there usually only, CTO at the very top of the company? And here I am having that in my title, and I actually report to other people. So it's a couple of things. We have a program at Microsoft called Microsoft for Startups, and part of our mission is to help startups grow and be better and do all the things that they want to do. And as part of that program, we have this thing called ScaleUp, which is a program that takes business to business companies and helps connect ones that have a product market fit directly to our sales organization. Microsoft has a huge sales organization. They have channels into all sorts of companies. And this is one of the places where out of all the ways we could help startups, we figured out this is a pretty powerful one. And so for the companies that come into the product, into the Scale Up program, we do a lot of work with them. And I serve as kind of a CTO as a service for those startups. And I also liaise directly with the CTOs of those startups and help them connect to other parts of Microsoft as they progress through their journey. And along the way, typically, we get into some of the non-technical parts of being a CTO, which is dealing with people things or giving advice or talking about how to grow teams. A lot of the startups that we work with, they're on that verge of going from 20 people to 100. And so they're going to go through those big growth changes that really are tough to go through. And or sometimes we run into startups that they're doing things internally that make sense, but they don't really work so well outside. So one of the cases that we've worked with is a company that had basically two people that was in a CTO role, and they were both equally capable. They're both equally great people. But we worked with them for quite a while to get them to the point where they could have one of them be the CTO and one of them not be the CTO, just so that from an external interface perspective, it made sense. But that, of course, took a lot of work to make sure the company could do that the people involved could do that you could get through this without bruising a lot of egos,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating job description to be in this role. It also links into this idea that there's a wider concept that we don't really have a good term for in the industry. A CTO is typically somebody who is a senior technical leader in an organization, but they're not necessarily the point in the organization where a lot of people report directly into. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But there's often you'll have a CTO and a vice president of engineering. The CTO's job is to be one thing. The VP of engineering is another thing. And it's kind of the end point for a group of people that you might call lead developers or something like that. Some concept of that sort that we don't have a good name for in the industry. But the idea is that there are technical leaders who are leading through primarily influence, and they have to grow up in a certain direction, and that direction has an endpoint in the CTO role. So one of the things we're doing in my organization is figuring out how to reach out to this group of people and really identify and connect and provide tools for them to help them with their journey.
Okay. So tools could be, simple things like software, but it also could be how to deal with some of the people stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's everything from, okay, what are 3 reasonable architectures for running on cloud computing?
Mm-hmm.
The basic 3-tier model or Kubernetes or serverless or whatever that is. To how do you scale from 2 people to 20 to 200, and back, and how do you act as a technical leader in these situations? So
Okay.
that part of the job is a lot fuzzier than the other one. The side of the job that's a CTO as a service for our scale ups, that's pretty easy to define. This other side, we're
Mm-hmm.
still working on it, so that's why it's
Mm-hmm.
a little fuzzy sounding. But
Well, I think that we'll get into some of the people challenges that come up as you move up into a role like that. But one way of doing it is getting at your story and how you moved into that role. And I think that you just have such great examples for people who they will resonate with others, who are dealing with these kind of challenges. So I'd like to see if you're willing to talk through, about how you got into the CTO in residence at Microsoft. You started out at a smaller company that was acquired. So where
right.
were you? What were you doing?
So I came to Microsoft via Wunderlist.
Mm-hmm.
Wunderlist is a small company that is based here in Berlin. In fact, I moved here to Berlin to join that company. And we were a company of about 60, 70 people. And in 95, or sorry, not 95. Wow, that was a total brain misfire there. 2015.
Okay.
20 years difference there, man. Yeah, so 2015 we were acquired by Microsoft, and that was a pretty big deal because we went from being a startup that was a very consumer-based startup, a very design-led startup, to being part of a company and an organization that is vastly bigger. Microsoft's got 120,000 or something like that employees. Lots of divisions. They really cater towards the enterprise software market, and in some ways it was the acquisition that we never expected. It made a lot of sense in some degree, in some ways, because we were about personal productivity, and Microsoft's new motto or new tagline is, empower every individual on the planet to do more. And so there's a synergy there, and there was a synergy in the sense of what we wanted to do with Wunderlist was connected with all the various places where tasks could come from. But on the other hand, we were really consumer focused and really individual focused, and we were going into a place where the first order of business was to basically become a part of Office in some sense, in some manner. And that was something we had to define how we were going to do that. But that was the job given to us.
Okay. So what was your role there at Wunderlist when you had the
So
acquisition?
so my role, Wunderlist was, we were going on the newfangled management zero hierarchy kind of
Okay.
management structure. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
really tough to define what my role was exactly, but I was hired in as basically the senior developer on staff underneath Chad Fowler, who was combination CTO, VP engineering kind of a role.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was there to really help influence where we were going, really help serve in an architecture capacity, really help develop what was happening within the organization from a technical standpoint. And when I first came in, we were on the verge of shipping Wunderlist 3, which was a huge upgrade for us. It was a huge systems change on the back end, took lots of work. And so my job was to basically do whatever it took to get that shipped. So part of that was working on the Android client at times, or working on the back end system at times, or even sorting out what we needed to do to get it ship ready. So probably the best contribution I made to that particular release was building a system that was it was basically a chaos monkey kind of system. We called it Bösegurken, which is German for evil cucumbers. And I cannot tell you why we chose this, other than Chad and I found a sticker somewhere that said, pickles are cucumbers that are swimming in evil. And so something about evil and cucumbers went together, and we ran with it. Geeks, too much coffee.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it was essentially a system where we could load test our new backend services, and we could simulate any number of users and any number of users doing crazy things like creating a zillion tasks and sharing those tasks with each other. And as we ran the system in our run up to launch, we broke our servers many times using this. But the end result was that when we launched, we were able to launch without a hiccup. It was the most boring product launch I've ever been part of, because we turned the servers on, we scaled up, and nothing happened, which was both satisfying and vaguely disappointing.
Yeah.
when you're braced for impact as a back-end engineer. And so I did that, and then Chad briefed me on a little development that was happening. It looked like we were going to be in talks with a major corporation to get acquired. And that corporation, I found out later, was Microsoft. And so as part of that, we had to do this huge due diligence process, which was basically submit all of our code to code scans and take care of all the potential issues in the code, copyright issues or license issues, or even security issues, all sorts of stuff. And it's one of these processes where when you have a due diligence from an investment standpoint, there's a certain amount of care that's taken to make sure that the investor is going to get at least a fair chance of getting a return. But when a huge corporation buys a smaller corporation, the risks involved are different, because in our case, our purchase price was somewhere between reportedly $100 and $200 million, which not a bad sum of money, right? But Microsoft's risks was actually much larger than that, because if we had brought in an IP bug, or if we brought in a security bug, we could have potentially cost Microsoft billions. And so in that respect, I compare doing the acquisition process for a company buying another company, especially when the sizes are different. If investing is like simple stock investments with degrees of risk, these kind of deals are more like, options or subprime mortgages, or they package up a lot more risk inside of them. And so we went through this process of about 6 or 7 months of working through what it took to be acquired by Microsoft, which was a huge undertaking. And, we got to the end of it and we were pretty happy about it. We went from having, thousands of issues that we had to deal with to hundreds to tens, and then finally none. And, deal closed, everybody was happy. We announced it out to the rest of our employees, and, we thought the hard part was done at that point. So
okay. Little did we know.
Little did we know. So that was my role at Wunderlist. And then as we came into Microsoft, that role shifted a bit. We went from being a amorphous organization that really didn't have structure to one that had structure. We come into a company like Microsoft, and all of a sudden everybody gets titles, and those titles are in a hierarchy, and the hierarchy means something. People are called principal engineer or senior, or all the things that they come in level numbers, 59 or 62 or 67. And of course, the first challenge we had to deal with was everybody saying, well, why is somebody ranked at that level and not at another level?
Right.
And we had this up and down throughout the organization. A really good example is one of the founders. Wunderlist was a company called Six Wunderkinder. So the actual company name in Germany was called Six Wunderkinder, which means six wonder kids, right? There were six founders. And they were all young, but one was really young. And, he had basically joined kind of out of college or in college, I think, still. And so he was still rather a junior guy, but he was a founder. And so, he comes into the company, and of course he got the benefit of being a founder. He got the payout from being a founder.
Right.
But all of a sudden he's a junior engineer, and he's like, hey, but, and
right.
that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a very awkward position for that particular person to be in, to have had that success, and yet they're ranked at something else within the new company.
Right.
So these kind of changes happened all throughout the workforce. And then the second thing that happened is we had several leadership changes that happened in rather quick succession. Our CEO decoupled from our day-to-day operations. Another executive had to move to the States because he was married to an American, and they had a family, and his wife really wanted to be close to her family. And so, to help keep the marriage together, I don't know if it was that
life
serious.
Choices. Yeah.
There's a life choice there that they needed to move to the States, and so they did. And another colleague had some family issues come up, and they had to move back to the States. Another of the senior execs had a kid, and then she had another kid, right? And in Germany, we have really great paternity and maternity leave policies, which meant that that person was then not with us for an extended amount of time. We had all these things that none of them were really bad, right? None of them were a case where somebody was being a bad actor or really a horrible person or anything. In fact, all these things were totally understandable, totally rational, the kind of things that you want to support. But it meant that the people who had guided that leadership vision of the company through its gestation and into the acquisition were no longer playing as strong a role or even a role in the integration process.
Right.
And so that fell to the next level of us who were in the organization. And I was the senior engineer, and we had another person who was from the PM side. And there's a couple other people that were involved in this. And we basically had to put together a new leadership organization within the organization as it was going through this very tumultuous time, which, looking back on it and talking about it, already sounds like a pretty hairy experience.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are a lot of different factors here that were contributing to what ended up happening as a result.
Yeah.
But at the time, you're just doing what you needed to do, right?
Exactly. And at the time, every step of the way, we were making decisions that made sense in the context of what we were trying to do. And, my bottom line goal, my objective throughout the acquisition and the integration period was to have a successful integration, i.e. one where our team was seen as successfully contributing to a new company. So then we could really, in a sense, buy our way to relevance within the company, and not necessarily buy our way in terms of putting money down and purchasing that or trying to buy it on the black market of respect, but more in the sense of if we could guide the group through the transition like that, then we could write the rest of our story within Microsoft, right?
Okay.
So it's a pretty straightforward kind of goal, or at least I thought it was. We all thought it was on the leadership team.
So how did it go? What happened?
So, well, along the way, what made total sense to do to us, and maybe to from a logical perspective, it didn't resonate. It didn't capture. It didn't really capture the imagination, or it wasn't something that a large number of people that were on our staff wanted to do. So, you know, our team, we used a lot of Linux in our backend infrastructure systems, and we used microservices, and we had all sorts of different development languages. So we had people that were basically open source Linux geeks running Clojure microservices, you know, in the system, and they were badasses at that. And part of what we needed to do in order to integrate within the bigger Microsoft organization was start integrating with systems that were not Linux, were not Clojure or Scala or any of the other kind of cool hip languages that we were used to using.
Right.
But instead were these big enterprise things that had been around for 20 years. And, you know, things like Exchange and,
Right.
you know, Active Directory, and, you know, things that were just very almost anathema to a lot of the people on our team.
Right.
And, you know, this is a matter where, you know, neither of those is actually better than the other. They're just different from each other. Mm-hmm. But it was a sudden point at which we found ourselves in a position where we didn't have the alignment that you want to have in an organization. So in a well-functioning organization, you know, the saying is alignment beats consensus. You know, if everybody's motivations are lined up in the same direction, the rest is almost easy. Whereas if everybody's alignments aren't the same, then you have to have lots of agreement processes, and the agreement processes don't necessarily stick. And so what wasn't so obvious to us is, as a startup, our product was a to-do list manager, right? It was not that complicated of a product, but it was a to-do list manager.
Right.
And that was what we were building. And as part of the integration, we needed to integrate that within Microsoft's bigger systems, which meant our technology choices were changing. But as a startup, the people who are working on the technology, you know, the guys working, the ladies and gentlemen working on the services, they weren't actually there to write a to-do list application. They actually didn't care so much,
okay,
you know, what it was that their skills were being used on. They were there because we gave them an opportunity to do Linux and
right.
Clojure or Scala or Haskell or any of these other tools that were available. We gave them the ability to do this, and they were there for that primarily. And so as our product needs changed, it kind of left behind, or the product need got out of alignment with where the engineering team was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And so suddenly we had a bunch of people who were like, okay, so what am I working on here? And that was, we had other difficulties, of course, but, you know, that was kind of one of the key defining difficulties that we ran into. And as we went through this, you know, we had a lot of friction between everybody, right? Because there's one group of us wanted to succeed within Microsoft, the other group of us wanted to you know, just hack on code and have fun, and this was not interesting. And then there was, you know, people all along the spectrum. Okay. And what was surprising here is that we found out that, okay, we had a leadership wobble in the fact that we had to step into kind of a leadership vacuum and work the group through. But we also found that in the process of working through all these other issues with alignment, like I found I had an empathy wobble.
Okay.
Right.
What does that mean? Yeah.
So I picked up the empathy wobble phrase from a TED Talk. And I'm going to, Francis Fry. Is it Francis Fry? I sure hope it's Francis Fry. Did a TED Talk about how empathy wobbles could destroy trust. And empathy wobbles, so trust comes from being able to really have authenticity and being able to be logic and be able to have a connection with your people, empathy. And this is pretty well known. But when any one of those things is out of whack, then trust is threatened. And when more than one thing is out of whack, trust in the system totally breaks down. And in our case, well, in my case personally, I'll speak for myself here because there was other things going on and all sorts of stuff. But this is really where I messed up, or where I ran into something interesting was my logical side of, or the logical position where I came from was never a problem, right? The plans we were coming up with, they made sense in the context of what we need to do. If A, then B, then C, right? If we were to be a valuable part of Microsoft, we needed to do this thing, which meant we needed to make these technology choices, which meant we needed to do this next thing. And I remember actually saying it more than a few times, if anybody can actually poke a hole in this argument, I'm more than willing to reconsider it, right?
Interesting, yeah.
Challenge. Exactly. It's like I wasn't necessarily sold on it from a purely emotional perspective, but from a logical perspective, what we were doing all made sense, and it was not something that was an issue. And then as far as authenticity, I've always wondered how I score on that. Since this happened, I've actually taken several profiles and tests and all the rest of it, and in the 360 and done 360 reviews and done some interviews.
Yeah.
And my authenticity usually seems to do pretty well. People, even in the worst of times, somehow I manage to be me, and people don't really feel like I'm being a two-faced or whatever. I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve. I tend to tell people what I think. But where I had the wobble, where I had the problem, was in the empathy section. And really being able to empathize with the fact that, we had this plan that made total sense. But how do we actually get our people to move and work on board with this? I've always thought of myself as a fairly empathetic guy. I can sit and have a conversation with most anybody, and I didn't really think I had a problem in this arena. But in retrospect, the way I explain it is I have one particular place where I just don't get people, if that makes sense.
Okay, where is it?
So, well, a good way of explaining this is science. I love science.
Right.
If somebody is one of those folks that may be a flat earther, they and I have a problem. I don't get where they're coming from. I can't even begin to fathom how you can be a flat earther. And so therefore, what the hell are you talking about? What the hell are you doing? The rest of all the discussions that could come from that point of just go away. And so, applied to this, what I found was, by not understanding why people couldn't actually identify the logic, I was dismissing at times where they were coming from as individuals, and not necessarily then putting in the right amount of help or understanding to help people through this transition in a different way.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
That does. So you're saying that people didn't see the same logic, or the way that you felt it, or saw the logic, and maybe had other reasons, not just logical reasons, but emotional reasons. You wouldn't even maybe consider that as something that was important. So it seemed dismissive.
Right. And it's not that I didn't consider it important. I mean, I understood, people didn't want to do something, therefore they needed to make changes. It's not quite as draconian as it might sound at first. All throughout, I understood people didn't would have a problem with this. But on the other hand, I tried making it clear, and we all tried on the leadership team making it clear, like, for all the people who had an incentive to stay for a year or 2 years at the company, yes, please, work with us, get us through that point, get your incentives that you deserve from the acquisition. But then if this is not a situation that's going to work out for you, then by all means, let's help everybody move on,
Right.
or do something else. And it's that point at which, okay, it's easy enough to say, okay, you don't want to be part of this organization doing work on these big enterprise systems. Be a big person and actually figure that out and make your own choices, to actually then
Okay.
helping those person through making those choices, or still maintaining the ability to be a productive member of the team, even when they themselves had fundamental differences with what they were working on and how that clashed with their own inner needs.
Well, so you are helping to lead through that to help
Mm-hmm.
people both figure that out for themselves and do the right thing and be professional in the meantime.
Right, right.
Okay.
And so the place where this hurts is not necessarily in any of the actions that we took or any of the behaviors we actually did. I mean, I invested a lot of time into actually trying to help people through this. But even so, that empathy wobble, how that trust gets eroded, or how that affects trust, means that people perceive your intentions in a very different way.
Right.
So for some reason, when somebody's in the middle of having this problem, or in the middle of having a trust issue, the decisions that they make appear arbitrary to the people who are on the other side of that.
Okay.
And it will look like a person is acting in their own self-interest, and that they don't care, and they're aloof and ambivalent. And of course, none of that helps in this kind of situation,
Right.
right? Um, and so you can have somebody on one side of the equation that's saying, "Hey, look, we're trying to do this so that we can make sure everybody's got a good job later," and yet, and all the logic works out, and all the reasons make sense on paper. But because there's something missing there in the empathy area, your motivations suddenly look very, not evil, but not acceptable to the other side. They don't look they don't feel like you're acting in their interest. And even if you
Right.
are, even if you think you're doing the right thing, they don't think you're doing the right thing, because there's
Yes.
that disconnect.
Certainly, without trust, people start uh, getting maybe even a little paranoid almost. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Hmm.
Because if I trusted this person, I would assume the benefit of the doubt, right? But I don't
Exactly.
trust this person, I'm going to assume the worst, right?
Exactly.
So
And
how did
so
you
we
get
get
through that?
painfully.
Yeah,
Um,
I bet. Yeah.
very painfully. I mean, through over time, we had a lot of personnel issues. We had a lot of behavioral issues in our organization. And one of the things I learned very concretely is that culture is not something that you define by what you write down on a piece of paper or the posters you put on a wall, right?
Yeah.
Culture really is the behaviors that you tolerate in an organization.
Hmm.
And where we got kicked quite heavily was that because we were working through all of these issues in the integration, but we all were also in a place where we didn't have that, we didn't have a direct connection with the authority that had come from before, right? Whatever that is that people buy into in leadership that comes from a group of leaders in a company, we didn't have a connection to the previous group of leaders that really helped us
Right.
forward. And so because of that, we had a lot of issues, people feeling bad, people feeling not in a good place where they could do their best work. And we met those challenges with a variety of responses. Usually it was like, oh, well, we'll figure this out later, or oh, we'll
Hmm.
try to do something. And we tolerated a lot of things that weren't so great. To quote the Radical Candor book, we wallowed in ruinous empathy, um, which is funny because I talk about my own empathy wobble and I use ruinous empathy here. But
Yeah.
But it really was, we postponed all sorts of things that we should have acted on because, either not knowing the right thing to do, or, just give it a little more time, or,
Hmm.
don't directly confront an issue that happens to be there. Um, and so uh, a lot of these problems came up time and time again. And then of course they metastasize, they turn
Right.
really bad.
Hmm.
And it's in those kind of situations where you find out that, um, you know, like if you're used to thinking of yourself as the good guy, if you're used to thinking of yourself as the
Yeah.
person who usually does pretty well by everybody involved, and you find yourself in this situation, all of a sudden you're not the good guy. In fact, at least to some people, you appear to be the evil guy.
Right.
And rectifying that took a lot of work and a lot of time. And some of it is relationships that get pretty shattered and pretty ruined.
Hmm.
Some of it is just a slowdown and actually executing on plan. um, in our case, the net result of most of it was that everything just moved incredibly slow for us. So
Right.
instead of rapidly moving into a new position within the company, we got stuck. And we went from the promising startup that was coming in to being the, okay, what's going on with those guys? Why aren't they shipping? Why aren't they delivering? Why aren't they doing all of the cool stuff that they should be doing, because they're a startup and they know what they're doing? And, all every reason why, you're admired when you come in the door.
Hmm.
Um, and all of a sudden you're not performing on that.
Yeah.
So so for us, it wasn't so much that it was um, a huge train wreck, right? It wasn't that bad. I tell this story and I'm tired, and at times I'm painting myself in a negative light, but it wasn't that bad. It's just that things didn't move, and
Yeah.
so we got stuck. And getting the entire organization unstuck was something that took a while. It took a lot of work by a lot of people, and and for me that took a lot of introspection and a lot of examination. Okay, what am I doing here? What am I getting out of this? What is my own role in this? What could I have done better? What could have I done differently?
Hmm.
um and yeah.
So there's a lot of growth as a result.
Yeah.
And yeah, personal growth as well as for the company. It seems to me like sometimes when you go through some of these challenges, your relationships end up stronger as a result. Have you
Hmm.
found that?
With
For
some
some,
people very much so.
yeah.
Yeah, for some people very much so. Some relationships were torched, right?
Right.
There are some
Hmm.
relationships that are still in the pending category of whether
Hmm.
of what they can do. Some of the relationships that were pretty antagonistic, or at least not friendly, have softened. I'm in a fortunate position where one person that we're at odds with quite heavily is actually a neighbor of mine, and now several years later, we're pretty cool with each other, right?
Yeah.
Everything's okay, but that's time, and that's understanding, and that's
Right.
distance, and that's all. That's a lot of things taking
Yeah.
place.
Well, Duncan, it's so hard to get the truth behind this. So many experiences, people are like, oh, yeah, it was great. Everything went fine. Yeah, we had a few hiccups, blah, blah, blah. But, nobody actually shares the details. So for you to be willing to go through and talk about this and how it, going through this acquisition really affected the whole company, affected you personally, affected the relationships, the trust, the different ways that people had to think and be and decide if they wanted to stick it out or not. I mean, this is really big, and it's realizing that on the front end, it's you're in for a rough ride for a while when you go through a process like this. And is that what you're doing now, is helping some people with these kinds of things as
Very
a
much so. I mean, part of the reason I did a lot of work on figuring out, these things was for my own sanity and for my
Mhm.
own learning. But part of it is, how do you take this forward? How do you help people do this better the next time?
Right.
And the lessons from that have really taught me that some of the things that sounded really, almost obvious in business
Right.
textbooks or, organization textbooks or leadership textbooks, what do those lessons actually matter? Where do they really,
Mm.
where are the really important things? How do you actually see or sense even when something's going to go wrong? And it's also led me to write up some stuff both internally and externally about the challenges that you face going through this kind of a process, right? The biggest one for us that I talked a lot about already was alignment. you
Mm-hmm.
know I think that when you're doing an acquisition now, or when you're going through a period of major change in a startup, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an acquisition, it can be when a startup pivots to a new business model, or
Right.
when they decide to change their product, right? The people who are there working on something, they're working on something for their own reasons as well as the
Mm-hmm.
company's reasons. And through every major change, you're going to have these shifts of alignment. And it's, this experience taught me how important it is to actually go back, and when you have a change like this, to then go through and figure out how to either regain alignment or to do the right thing by the people who may not be in the place where their alignment will ever line back up again with what the company is doing. And how do you sort through that in a way that is both beneficial to the company but also beneficial to the individual, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing worse in my book at this point than saying than when a company does a change and they leave some group of people, or even a person, in a position where they're no longer happy, or they're no longer in a place where they're doing their best work, and then doing nothing about that,
Hmm.
right? That is so shockingly bad. And even when they do it for the right reason, like leave the person alone because, oh well, we're still paying them money, right?
Yep.
They still have a job, they still have a place to
Yeah.
come pick up. Well, those are nice reasons, right? Those are good, especially since you don't want to, like, chop somebody's income off, suddenly, and leave them in a jam because they don't have a financial backing to drop onto. At the same time, leaving somebody in that place emotionally is so damaging to both them and the people around them that it is, it's fairly criminal to let that happen, in my opinion now.
Wow, that
Uh,
sounds like A plus empathy in my book. I mean, seriously, understanding where someone's at and not leaving them stranded. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, but
Mhm.
that's the kind of thing where it's it's just, how do you do the right thing where the right thing is not black or white? It's some
Mhm.
middle ground, right?
Mhm.
um like one of the situations which I was really proud of, actually, in this experience, was we had one engineer on our team that was very much uh, wanting to use a particular language and a particular technology stack, and work at a startup. She did not want to work in a big mega company. She wanted to work in a small environment. And one of the things that we made sure to do was to actually get her to Redmond and spend a significant amount of time in Redmond, kind of seeing what the larger company was.
Mhm.
And the reason we did that was because it let her actually get a very good sense of the environment in which she would find herself in if she stayed at the company for a while, right?
Yeah.
And she came back, and not long after, she resigned. And of course, some of my colleagues were feeling pretty bad about this. They're like, "Oh, why did we do this? Why did we invest time? Why did we do this if somebody's just going to resign?" And I was actually pretty happy about this case, because it meant that she was making a decision for herself that was good for her, and she was doing so with more information than she had before.
Right.
So she wasn't just doing it from a standpoint of, oh, I don't think this is going to work, I'm just going to go. She actually
Mhm.
had the data and said, okay, no, I don't want to be in this environment. I want to be in this other environment. And she had the time and space in order to make that decision. And so I'm not saying we did perfectly by her either, right? Because that might sound like, yeah, we scored on that one, and maybe the reality is somewhere in between. But at least we did better with her than we did with some of the other people. And in a place where you are in this ambiguous place where alignment's no longer happening, this is one of the responsibilities that I think we have as leaders, is to sort out how to take care of these other things, these other people.
Well, we couldn't have ended on a better note than that, Duncan, because I mean, we have really rapidly used up our time here, and I just think that is actually what else can you say after that? Doing the right thing and helping people make the decisions that they need to make for their best work in their lives, right? So, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and I will include your contact information in the show notes if you want people to reach out to you afterwards to
Sure.
talk. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Excellent.
easy to find.
Yes. Well, so thank you, Duncan, for sharing your story and for helping to inspire others, and also helping to inspire them look before they leap, I would say, and understand that there may be a lot of work ahead of them to get through some of these challenging times. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for talking through this with me.
Yeah. And thanks to our listeners and our viewers. Join us next time on Reinventing Nerds.